Hey, family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to the 100th episode of Faith on the Journey. I am so excited to share this moment with you because you have been a part of this entire journey with me. For those of you who've been here since day one, I appreciate you more than you know. And this episode is dedicated to you, those who are part of my family, who celebrated with me, who cried with me, who have supported me as I've not only built this podcast, but also have spent the last several years building my ministry. And so we're going to take some time today to reflect on some of our favorite episodes, some of the lessons that we've learned in the process of growing our Faith on the Journey podcast. Now, when I think back to episode 1, I laugh because when I decided to start a podcast, it was literally one of those things where I said, I think I'm going to start a podcast, not knowing anything about how podcasts actually worked. I didn't have any equipment. I didn't have this fancy mic. I actually had a cell phone. In my first podcast interview, I interviewed my dear friend Karina on my phone on freeconferencecall.com. The sound quality was a mess, yet and still, that is my top rated podcast since I started the show. But it just showed me that sometimes you can't get caught up in having all the right things in place or overthinking the process. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting started. And that's exactly what I did. And as time progressed, I, started figuring out, okay, maybe I can do this to help with the sound quality, or maybe I can tweak this, or maybe I can start actually having video versus just audio. And it continued to evolve. And so when I think about all the lessons that I learned over the first 100 episodes, I'm looking forward to the growth that's going to continue to happen as we move forward in our next season. And so let's take some time to just reflect on some of the great things that we discussed in our Faith on the Journey podcast. And we think about some of the themes. We covered a lot of ground. There were some amazing episodes that we covered on the topic of forgiveness. And I put together some of my favorite clips from different people who I interviewed.
Women have gone to shelters, and because of the word forgiveness, they have, and then with the badgering and the sorrowfulness of their mates. I'm gonna use him and her. Both men and women suffer domestic violence, but I'm using it because mine was a him, and so I'm going to use that. And I'm a she, and so it would just be easier for me to navigate it in that way. And so to be able to they will convince you. They will bring you flowers. There used to be something called the honeymoon state. That's not used anymore when we talk about domestic violence because even the honeymoon state is violence. And so they will do all that they can. They'll join the church. They'll get saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues as the Lord gave utterance. One Lord, one faith, and one baptism. They'll go to church more than you'll go to church. And then some pastor will see that happening and they would say, oh, you need to go back with him. You need to forgive them. Look what he's done. He's bringing you all these flowers. And that kind of advice, Jocelyn, can get you killed. And I think that's the main thing. There's other things I could say about this whole issue of forgiveness, and maybe we'll get into some of it. But we have to be careful with how we tell people. Number one, it's not your job to tell people what to do. It's not your place to tell people about forgiveness. People forgive at the level they're able to forgive, and that they're willing to forgive, and that they're ready to forgive. And the three things that come before forgiveness is safety. Safety. You have to heal. There are a lot of things that has to go on before you can even begin to talk to me about forgiveness, because all you're doing when you do that with me is that you're making me worse. You're making my fear worse. You're making my guilt worse. You're making me feel like Jesus is just going to send me to hell without passing go, without collecting $200. You make me feel as if I don't have sense enough to forgive, when I know that's in the Word of God, and that Jesus talks about it. It's interpreted wrongly talking about it, and all of those things are happening all at the same time. And it just may be enough to pressure someone to leave a relationship. And leaving is the most dangerous time in the world for a person to leave. People say, why don't she leave? We should celebrate the fact that they were able to leave, because statistics have it that you go back seven times before you actually ever leave, for sure.
Sometimes you do have to make the decision to cut someone off, but at the same time, How does forgiveness play a role in this? Can you cut them off and still have forgiven them? What's your thought process on forgiveness as relates to your healing process, even in situations where you have to distance yourself from someone?
Forgiveness is a process. You know, as Christians, we oftentimes, and I think I talked about this in one of our other interviews together. Um, people oftentimes, especially as Christians, expect us to say, hey, you're a Christian. If you want God to forgive you, you have to forgive other people. And I understand that. However, there's a process to that. And sometimes people continue, to cause you multiple traumas or continue to do things to you over and over again and take advantage of the fact that they know you're Christian and you're supposed to forgive them, and so sometimes people don't necessarily want or need your forgiveness. So you have to think about that, because if they continue, they don't mean what they say. When they, even if they say I'm sorry, and half of them don't even ask for forgiveness or even say I'm sorry, right? They will continue to harm you. And so you have to make a decision. What does forgiveness really look like in this situation? Does this person need me to forgive them or even want me to forgive them? Or do I need to forgive them for what they've done to me for myself? If I'm holding unforgiveness can cause harm to you physically, emotionally, and spiritually. If we're holding on to some things, well, I've held on to some unforgiveness to the point where I have become physically ill. It has impacted me physically because someone has hurt me so badly, and I kept rehearsing it over and over again, holding it close to, to my heart, where it caused me more harm because I nursed it and I rehearsed it and I didn't forgive the person. And though forgiveness is a process, the process has to begin because that person has gone on with their life. They may not even know that you're hurting in this way. You're still dealing with it. You're still holding on to it. So you have to begin the process of forgiveness. Now, forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, right? Forgiveness could mean that I release you from what you've done to me. I release that situation, but I'm not going to hold on to it anymore because it's causing me as much harm as it did when you first did it to me, when you first offended me, when you first violated me. So I'm going to release it and release you, but that doesn't mean that I have to allow you back into my life. I forgive you, but I'm no longer going to be in relationship with you.
Actually is.
Or
The analogy that God gave me is forgiveness is like an onion. And what I mean by that is where I am in the stage that I am is I forgive. I peel the onion and I cry, so to speak. And I move on through life and then it seems to show up again. And so many times we then beat ourselves up saying, "Well, I forgave that." But when the trauma is deep, it's layered. And that's okay. That we did forgive to the ability we could when we did it previously, but learning to be able to forgive deeper, to get freer, to get more freedom. And so learning to be nice to yourself instead of getting all I should be over this by now kind of a feeling, and just learn that sometimes it's a process. Healing is a process. We want to step into a magic booth and be all better. But so many times, life and the journey of healing is a process of learning how to be ready to let it more and more go. That's something that's really been impactful for me.
Yeah, we have to learn how to honor the process. There's been such teaching to try to rush us to the point of forgiveness. And yes, that's the end of the destination that we're trying to head to. But if we try to skip through that process, it's going to hurt us in the long run.
Absolutely. Because what we're actually doing is burying something alive.
That's it.
we're burying it alive. We're not actually hurting it all, at healing it all through that kind of process. And
He said, there's those times in your life where we can either be, we can demand vengeance, okay, and seek revenge, or we can be dispensers of grace. Like we have the choice, and you might even be justified in seeking the penalty or seeking that punitive action or whatever the case may be. But when you choose to operate, and I'm thinking of Jesus, hanging on the cross, looking down from the cross, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they did." I mean, all the stuff he felt, all the pain and the torture, and yet somehow in that moment, he demonstrated grace. And you want to talk about powerful? And so I thought, you know what? Um, Again, what are the three things? I want God to get glory. I want people to know they're loved by God, and I want Jesus to be proclaimed. So I'm thinking, okay, God's going to get glory if grace is shown here. Matthew's going to understand and know that God loves him, right? And then thirdly, Jesus is going to be lifted up. And so I said, I want the lesser charges. I don't want all this, heavy stuff. I don't want the felonies. I don't want any of that stuff. And so my attorney went back, and I remember she explained to me, they're in a conference room, and you have the judge, solicitor general, Matthew's attorney, president, and then mine, and they're all talking about this. And so the judge looks to my attorney and says, "Hey, what is there you want to do?" And she said, "This is what he wants." And the judge said, "I don't understand that. You're going to have to explain that to me." And so she began to talk about, who I am and what I believe and what I see in this whole situation and how God's going to work in it. And she said there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Like,
Mm, that interview still gives me chills. Such a powerful testimony of God's grace and love. But in addition to that, we also had several episodes where we focused on grief, the losses that we have experienced along the way, whether it's a loss of a loved one, a loss of a dream. And so let's check out some episodes on the topic of grief and loss.
When we are grieving, when there's a great loss in our life, there is a manifestation of that loss in every part of our being, every component of who we are as human creatures. It affects you body, mind, spirit, and soul when you're in that grief process. One of my favorite quotes is from C.S. Lewis, and I actually took part in a project, a video documentary about grieving, and that's when I first heard this quote and focused on it. But he said, "Nobody ever told me that grief felt so much like fear." And so when we're grieving, we're also dealing with this huge amount of fear, which we know is one of the enemy of our soul's chief tools to bring us down, is to help us. It causes us to feel afraid. We've lost this part of our story, this person, or even it could be a situation or a circumstance, but this person who meant so much. We fear more loss, and that God has taken something for us. So that fear can cause some exhaustion that you would never quite expect. And I found that many times when we're in the work of grieving, and it is work, is that we forget that we need to honor this part of our journey. Grief is a part of being a human being, and grief is work. And don't bully yourself. We bully ourselves sometimes because we don't recognize the symptoms. And they're not just emotional symptoms. There can be pain in your joints, in your body. You can have headaches and fatigue and insomnia. They're all these stress responses that are happening in the grieving process. There's even a name for it. Sisters, brothers, broken heart syndrome. Now, a practical way to think about this, a systematic practical way, is just as you wouldn't put yourself down for having the flu, or like so many of my friends and loved ones right now have some variant of COVID going on. You don't put yourself down for that and the symptoms associated. Oh, I have a headache. I'm such a loser. I have a sore throat. God has forsaken me. We bully ourselves when we're grieving and having those manifestations, but we don't bully ourselves when we're going through any other type of illness or sickness. So be brave enough to believe that what you're going through as you grieve is normal.
Because grief can be a very uncomfortable topic, and sometimes people don't know what to say, what to do to support someone. So if someone is listening right now and they have a loved one who's experienced a miscarriage, what are some things from your personal experience that person can do to offer support to their loved one?
Definitely. I mean, I think when that person's on your mind, and you're praying for them and the spirit's moving in you, like you need to go reach out to that person. And, each individual relationship is different. So it's like maybe that's your walking buddy and like you need to go for a walk with her. Maybe she loves a pumpkin chai in the fall. And so you're going to drop that off on the porch. Or, hey, I'm at Target. What can I pick up for you? Being more forward with that. But I'm going to tell you what, a genuine "I'm sorry" goes a really long way. You don't have to understand pregnancy loss. You don't have to be a veteran of pregnancy loss in order to extend sympathy. You know what Paul talks about in Second Corinthians about the compassion that we receive from Christ and how we're able to extend that to others. How many times have you felt alone? Have you felt isolated? Can you not extend that same compassion that Christ gave to you to another? And so I think that stigma of pregnancy loss can feel really big, a big hurdle, really damaging. But we can simplify it and really step into and support our sisters. We really can.
Yes.
Sometimes when we're going through these difficult losses, when we know that we're losing someone that we love so much, and we're taking care of them, we can become angry because anger is so much easier than the pain and the emotion that you feel, right? And so we can express anger at them, even though we're not really angry, the feelings that we feel are deeper. Well, I did that with my dad. And one day my dad said, it seems like every time you come, you're so angry. And I looked at him and I burst into tears and I said, it's because I don't want to break down every time I see you. And I just want to get everything right for you and just want to be there for you. And when he understood why, and when I understood that he saw this, I totally shifted. And it was my intention to just be okay. This is happening. And when you get to that acceptance point, which is a part of that grief process, it's going to be so much easier for you to understand that this is what you have. And however you spend that time, you will still have those memories. Ask yourself, why is it so important for them to remember everything? Because you will still have the memories. If they don't remember it, it's okay. It shouldn't be oh, I can't believe you don't remember this kind of feeling. It should be, I have this memory because I gave this time and I created this environment for it to exist. And it did exist. And I acknowledged that it existed. And I felt good. And I gave them that moment where they enjoyed it too. Sometimes we think if we can't remember, that means that we don't have enjoyment of it, but they can still enjoy things, right? Even though they can't always remember the activities in the moment, which is where we should all be living in the moment. The joy is there, the happiness is there.
Yeah. So for you, when you had gone through your process of grieving many lost dreams along the way, what
Mhm.
really helped you to move forward in those moments?
I whispered one thing to myself, to be perfectly honest, Jocelyn, and that is God knows best. Sometimes we don't necessarily trust him with the process, but he has a track record in my life of making all things good, making all things right. I have had the aha moment after that thing has bottomed out and it hasn't come to light. And then later on, I see why it didn't. And I usually end up being very grateful. So I would say that based on God's track record with me, I've been able to lean in and say, God, you know best. I don't like what I'm experiencing right now. I can't see where this is going, but I have to choose to trust you.
Those are some very helpful and valuable takeaways that we can consider on our journey when we are grieving a loss of someone that we care about or a loss of something that was important to us. But in addition to talking about grief and loss and forgiveness on the show, we also spent a significant amount of time talking about struggling with shame. Let's check out a couple episodes about that topic.
That shame is one of the lowest emotions that we can feel, right? So even shame is worse, and I don't want to say worse, but it's lower than even sadness, because you feel, if you're angry, you're going to take action. If you're sad, you're going to come up from it. But at the bottom is shame. And one of the things in living for, everybody else, we say try to keep up with the Joneses. I want to look like everybody. Because the thing is that so much is going on in the household, and I don't want anybody to know about that. I want to put up the front like all is well. Well, I went to an all-girl high school in partly grammar school and high school in New Orleans, and had 4 or 5 girlfriends. And my 4 or 5 girlfriends, they both had 2 parents. They had, their lifestyle. And I knew that they weren't going through what I was dealing with, particularly at the time. I knew that. And I just want to add to my mother is an amazing, amazing woman. And she was in our home but I just didn't trust the situation, that I couldn't tell a soul. So I wanted my life. I looked at my girlfriends and I knew that they weren't going through what I was going through, and it was happening to me. And I just felt a great deal of shame about it. And here's the thing, we can experience things over time and it becomes so normal. So when somebody taps your shoulder and say, hey, I think you might be a little shameful or might be ashamed of that, um, you feel like, wait a minute, this person is crazy. They don't know what they're talking about, because you've been living with it for so long. It's what we call normal. And so I had made very bad situations just appear normal. So when you tap my shoulder and say, hey, something's up, I just couldn't, sincerely, honestly, I couldn't see it. But I did have a great deal of shame, and I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want anyone else to know that this had happened in my home, that it happened to me. I wanted to be like my other 4 or 5 other girlfriends. Now, what's interesting is this: you can all put up a front. And there were 2 other girls that had their own challenges and their own issues, who were my dear friends. And in a million years, I would not have guessed that they were dealing with something similar to me. So,
And when I was having a conversation with you last week, one of our conversations was really tracing the core back to experiences that we might have had in childhood and how it impacts how we view life today. And for someone who might had struggles with feeling abandoned, feeling rejected by their biological parents if they were adopted, that cord can trace into decisions and experiences as an adult as it relates to how we view experiences. And so I would like for you to spend a little time talking about the importance of tracing the cord back and rewriting that narrative where you might have had a negative frame on how you looked at things and how we might need to shift that.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think that we need to go back to the understanding that our adoption, it was someone chose us over some other event in their lives. Somebody made us a priority as opposed to somebody left us, somebody neglected us. The stories that I've heard around my adoption are not something that I've ever shared with anyone. And there is a little bit of shame about it, believe it or not. We all will have some element of that, but I don't consider that being something that should become us. We should not walk in shame. Shame should not become us because we were adopted. On the contrary, I think that adoption speaks much about a new chapter, a new opportunity, possibilities, being chosen. If we really look carefully of what adoption is, someone chooses to take you in and bring you to a life that perhaps you wouldn't have had it otherwise.
What we have to get to is how are we going to release it every day? How are we going to release it every day, every day, every day? And I tell people, other ministers, like, chill out with people. You don't understand. I have a friend that, that had a miscarriage, and this was years upon years ago, but she could be looking at something on TV and see something like that, it triggers. See what I'm saying? And so we feel like, oh, in the name of Jesus, you should be healed. And if you're struggling with this, something's wrong with you. No, it's not. I believe something's a little off if we can't get to the point after we cry, after we feel that thing, to say, okay, Lord, I now release it. I'm human. Now, Lord, I continue to release this. I continue to let this go, and I place it in your hands. So it's not like I've really released shame. It's I am releasing every day just the shame when the devil decides he wants to bring something in my face. That's how I fight him. I release it.
Those were some excellent reminders for us as we navigate and overcome the shame that we might be carrying in our lives. But sometimes life just has a way of beating us down. We go through various obstacles in our life that can cause us to even question God's love. Let's check out some episodes where I was interviewing some dynamic individuals about their powerful story. I think about Wendy, who was going along her life. I believe she was well into her 40s when a freak incident took place that caused her to have all of her limbs amputated. And she talks about how she is still able to live one exceptional life. Followed by that, I interviewed Michaela, who was legally blind and lost the love of her life while still raising her children. And so check out these episodes and then a bonus video at the end of that.
And so finally, there we are. We're floating down the river and we're just having a good old time. And, so many people had told me, you should write a book, you should write a blog. And I'm like, no, what would I say? I don't know what to do about that. I'm not a writer. And so here we are, we're floating down the river. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? I can do stuff. I can do stuff. And this is really cool. And I bet there are people who are stuck in their pity party too, thinking they can't do the stuff. So let's start the blog and try and encourage people, because that's pretty much my gifting, is encouraging other people through whatever it is that they're going through. Even, there I was in a wheelchair and I was always the guy that would cheer people up. So it turned out the tubing day was one of the best days that I've had since my whole surgeries. And I started the blog and I called it One Exceptional Life, because by golly, we're having one exceptional life. I started to write about amputee stuff. And, this is me trying to cook in the kitchen when I can't even hold a spoon. And it was pretty comical, but ultimately I didn't want to focus on the amputations. I wanted to focus on the overcoming and moving on past the struggles. And that's where path I took. One Exceptional Life is about overcoming. It's about spiritual growth. It's about gratitude, joy, positivity, peace. Everything comes through the Lord in the gifts that he gives us. And we can't stay stuck. One of the things that I learned when I was sitting there waiting for him to answer my question, what do I do with my life now? He can't course correct you if you're not moving. And so when I started the blog, I felt the Lord's guidance. And so I would write, and, over the course of time, people would comment and they would respond to my emails and they would tell me how much encouragement I was giving them and ask me questions about how to grow their faith and how to reconnect with the Lord, because they were stuck somewhere too.
I mean, I found out because I was living in New Hampshire at the time on the East Coast at 9:00 East Coast time on April the 4th that my husband was dead. And that's within 9 hours later, only getting 4 hours of sleep. I'm surprised I got any sleep at all, but I had to get my daughter ready for school and act like nothing had happened. That was God, not me. So, and you don't get to always delve into your journey when you're a mom with young kids and raising kids, because you're busy doing mom life and all the things, and you have to be strong for them. So I feel like sometimes when you're on that type of grief journey, it's very different and very challenging, as it would be in any circumstances, because you don't get the time and the space as much to just do what you need to do for you in the way that you may do it if you were someone who kids are already grown and out of the house. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. So it adds an extra kind of caveat and component to it. And then you're a single mom, so you're carrying everything while you're grieving and then helping kids that might be grieving. So it's just so much, so many things, it's quite the deal. And let's not forget, I'm legally blind raising 2 kids so it's a lot of complications on top of everything.
And moved to Nebraska in 1990, thinking I would be here for about 2 or 3 years. And here, 32 years later, I'm still here. And my life has significantly changed. That The woman that I met in California that became my wife passed about 3 years ago, ovarian cancer. The restaurant that I opened has since closed. I went bankrupt, and I'm still living here. I'm still here to tell my story about what God can do, regardless of circumstances. In 2016, it was Christmas time. Everything was just seemed like it was collapsing. One of our businesses had just closed, and that dominoed into the other business and threatened it. And I was just under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I sat down in my chair, like where I usually sit, and right next to me on the side table was a little candle, a white candle with gold embossed letters that said the word hope on it. And I looked at that and I felt as if it was mocking me. So I grabbed that little candle and I took it outside and I threw it in the trash. And I felt smug about it. And I came inside, sat down, and the voice said, "Now we can get somewhere." And I began a dialogue with the Lord about your hope was out of date and we need to upgrade your hope. It's fine that you threw the old one away because we're going to take you to a new place. And that began a new journey toward true, what I believe now is, I mean, not that my hope then wasn't true, but I had to get a new hope for the new journey that I was on.
Now, you cannot walk away from listening to those episodes and not be encouraged. But in addition to encouraging people along their journey, one thing we really wrestle with on this show is, what is healing? What does the process look like to experience healing in your life? And I heard some amazing words of advice from people throughout the years, and I wanted to share that with you. So check out these episodes.
What I love is what you said, Reverend Jocelyn. You said, what is your definition of healing? And I understand from healing is that it is a step-by-step, moment-by-moment process. It is actually a commitment to building mindfulness of every snippet of change that you experience in your life in that area where you were afflicted, where you're overcoming. Is similar to when you scratch yourself. Once you see the scab forms on the wound, you take the bandage off because it's no longer needed. And until that scar is gone, in your eyes, it's still healing. And sometimes, even when wounds close completely underneath the wound, the doctors would tell you that bed sore or that deep wound will never heal completely. So take care of the protective coating that it has, because any blunt force or compromised immunity can reopen and cause that wound to eviscerate. And it's the same with us as the body of Christ. Some of our wounds that we have will be healed, where no matter how much is probed and plugged and prodded on this earth, it will never eviscerate or reopen. And some of them will be in the progression of healing until we're with Jesus. And sometimes that happens because Christ wants us to remember that we need him to stay in a position of freedom and rescue in that area, that we will never look to ourselves. When it comes to my trauma, I cannot look to myself to define the righteousness, the victory. I must look to the cross of Christ. So I thank God that I am the healed and I am the healing of Christ, because he's always finishing the work in me. And that's how I see healing and healed.
Community, something that is imperative for someone to heal is they need a sense of safety. They need to feel safe. And see, I didn't feel safe with God. And that's where the healing of our relationship with him, well, we need community of safe people to tell us God is safe. There's a song by Phil Wickham called Safe. And I remember when I came across that, because I needed to know that God was safe. I could bring my wounded soul to him and he would be safe. And the beginning of my safe journey started with a little group that I was a part of that a friend of mine had started. We did the boundaries video teaching, and she called it Safe Group. And there were like 8 of us there, nothing left the room. it was so healing. That was the first time I really experienced a safe community. And it starts with trauma is personal. And it's an owning of the truth that your trauma is yours. Don't let anyone tell you different. You need to validate that. There's pain and screaming going on inside of you that you need to acknowledge is there, and you need to love yourself out of that pain. You need to welcome the love of God into that to heal that pain, because it can be healed. Like the subtitle of that book is The Love That Heals. Part of it is The Love That Heals. And that's talking about the pursuing love of God, the safe pursuing love of God that understands your pain, that will come and sit right in your pain with you, will listen to you, will convince you of his love, will touch the things that you need touched inside your soul, will reveal things to you little by little in the layers and ways that you need them to be revealed to you, so you can heal little by little by little. Because healing is a process. And how long it takes to heal depends on so many things. How many things do you need to heal of? How deep does it go? How sensitive are you? How resilient are you? Yeah. How willing are you to do the work? A lot of people won't do the work. When I got to the end of my counseling time, my counselor told me that I didn't need her anymore, that she had to be upfront with me because she's a professional. And I'm like, okay, I still feel like I need you. So I kept going. But later, when I was ready to be done myself, because she said, you can still come, of course, I asked her, why was I done? And she had called me a textbook healing. And I'm like, why? Why did you say that? Why did you call me that? What makes me different? And she said, courage. Courage. You took courage to look and see what was going on in your life. You took courage to do the work that needed to be done in your life so you could heal. Courage. You applied the courage. And what courage is doing it afraid. Courage doesn't mean you don't have fear. Courage means I am terrified, but I'm going to do it anyways.
I remember walking and I was praying and I asked God, I said, you're the only one that can help me. And so I need you to help me through this. And God did. God did through people. God did through conversations. Actually got married. I'm now divorced, but I got married during the time of me exposing myself to those embedded hurts and pains that I went through as a girl and throughout my teenage life. And so I recognized that I needed to do something more to heal myself. And what did that look like? And I had therapists in my family. And so certain conversations I would have with them, they really thought it was important to be a part of or be with someone that was a professional that can really help debunk and break down a lot of things that I was feeling. And so it took time. It took time for me to find a therapist that worked. I've learned that therapy is like finding a good shoe. You can't just go to one and think that that's okay. You have to really be able to find someone that's going to be able to fit you in your total and whatever that is. And so I found a woman, a therapist. I was intentional about it because it was a lot of work because I'm a manipulator. And so I could sit and have conversations with a professional and manipulate the whole situation. And so because I knew that about me, I'm like, I have to find somebody that's going to see through me. And when I did, oh my God, that's when the work really began. And so
And the reality is we are in process.
Yes.
God is still working on us. And it's all it means is still some things there that we need to work through. And so any thoughts on that in terms of helping people to understand this process?
Yes. Well, I love what you said about offering ourselves grace, because that is key. And I feel like we need to receive that grace from God because he offers it to us. There is nothing in scripture, there is nothing in our process where he tells us hey, you need to instantaneously get yourself together, and pull yourself together and get your life together. The other kind of visual that I like to use when I'm working with others is imagine yourself, like in a spiral where you feel like you're going round and round. And sometimes exploring your story feels like that, where it's like, wait a minute, am I circling back around this again? I said, but imagine if you are circling upwards, let me see if I can bring my finger up in here. You're spiraling upwards towards something bigger and better and towards a better story rather than spiraling downwards. So if we stop and again, offer ourselves some distance from our story, we can usually see, well, if I circle back around to this, maybe it's a little less painful or a little less difficult to share or whatever it may be. So your experience of sitting in front of those girls, like, okay, wait a minute, tears are coming, or whatever. And yet you're able to recognize, okay, I can work through this. I have a little bit more work to do. There's a little less shame, a little less fear. We're moving upwards. We're moving upwards. So it's completely okay if something comes back up to you 4 or 5 times. That's probably God's grace to you saying, all right, let's just peel a little bit more back, all of this right here. We don't need to do it all at one time. Let's just take a little layer. Okay, go about your business. All right, let's circle back again. But we're moving up. We're moving up.
Healing is definitely a process, and we learned some great advice from those in the last set of clips to really help us move forward on our journey. One of the things that I really have enjoyed is also the men who I had the opportunity to interview on the show. Sometimes men are not given the space they need to be honest about the emotions that they're carrying. But some of the men who I interviewed found strength to be vulnerable and courageous about their story. And they shared some powerful messages with our audience. So check out a few of these episode clips.
First of all, I would say that if you feel like you have some issues with anger or lack of trust or depression or anything like that, is don't be afraid to ask for help. That's one of the biggest things I think is as men, our pride gets in our way from us saying, hey, I need help, I can't do this on my own. And that was a sticking point for me for a long time. And then once you do that, you have to be unconditionally honest with who you're working with, because if you're not honest, they can't help you. And that unconditional honesty was the biggest part. And, I told Christina, I said, you got to be able to call BS on me, because, I might try to get one over on you. And if I do, I need you to call me out on it.
And so it culminated for me in my early 30s. I've said before, hopelessness became the only hope I had some nights. I didn't know how to put that in words, but there were literally nights I laid down and said, I just don't want to wake up tomorrow. I don't want to do this again. I might have been inspiring to some people even in that season of my life. I was accomplishing things. I have certainly had my fair share of accolades in my life and won awards and done things that are impressive. But those things don't do much for your self-worth when you don't realize your own value. And I think there's a lot of people who go through that. You're thinking that next job promotion, that next car, getting married, having those children, those things will make me whole. Well, the reality is that the wholeness you have, if you don't feel it now, the next accomplishment won't get it to you. I had this moment of driving down a highway and just shaking my fist at heaven and saying, if you're really here, then why is my life this way? And why can't I thought I'd be doing more by now. I thought I'd be happy. I thought all these things. And I heard God for the first time that day. It was in June of 2016. And among the things that he told me was, Maurice, I put you on the earth to change more lives than you really understand, but you don't understand how precious and valuable life is. There's things that you need to open your eyes to and pay attention to. I wish I could say that everything in my life changed that day. A couple months later, my brother passed away. It was the second brother who had died in 2 years. And 2 months after that, I got married. And I remember it was my wedding night, and I had gone outside to go to the store, and I walked outside and I had a panic attack outside of the hotel we were staying at that night on my wedding night. And I said, God, I know that you're here. I know now that you're real, but I can't do this life like this anymore. And so whatever it is that you want from me, whatever it is that you're calling me to, here I am. And so it was those line in the sand moments. I didn't want to be the man that I used to be anymore. It was, do you wish to get well? I wished to get well that day. And that was really the start of my transformation, getting into the word for real. I joined a church soon after that. My wife and I did. And just getting serious about my faith. I didn't want to be religious. I wanted a relationship with God. And that is
what I have found is men don't know the depth of their hurt. They don't often, they're not connected. We disconnect at the neck. We are head separated from heart oftentimes. And a wound, a trauma that happened in our childhood, we don't always connect our hearts to understand that wound, that hurt is creating this anger. That anger turns sideways, and coming out sideways is why we act out, why we abuse, why we gamble, why we sex, why we do things that are harmful to our own souls and to the souls of people who care about us. And I think it's fear. I think it's a disconnect that happens. That's a block because men don't always connect their behavior to their hearts, to their emotions, to their traumas. Not having the skill or understanding of how to deal with it. I think there are men who know that they're carrying a wound, but what do they do about it? In a society, especially in African American culture, where you don't talk about mental health, you don't talk about problems, suck it up. You're not a man if you don't just suck it up. Not knowing how to handle it, and a culture that encourages keep it hidden. I have learned for myself that I actually have more power and more strength by owning what my wounds are, owning my vulnerability, and owning and being accountable for my choices. There's where the real power is when we are accountable, when we take responsibility for how we're feeling and how we're acting. That takes an incredible amount of power. It takes little to no power to lash out. Sometimes that's automatic. The strength is in controlling the tongue, life and death and the power of the tongue. Controlling the tongue, controlling our action, that's real strength. That's real courage. And so teaching men where their real strength is and where their real power is what we do on these weekends. There are exercises and processes that allow men to tell the naked truth in front of other men and receive the grace of God from that through their brothers.
You know, where people question your faith or question their own faith as maybe my faith isn't strong enough, if I think I need a therapist. And again, first of all, the Bible doesn't talk about therapy. I doubt that it was available. Maybe it was. We don't know. But how does it serve anyone well to think that God doesn't want them to use something that could make them a better person? So it's in alignment. And I found that the more I engage in the work of my own emotional healing, the more I'm able to actually believe what the Bible says about me in terms of who I can become and the ability to receive love from God, first believing that I am lovable and deserve love, to think about, people quote scriptures around your destiny and purpose and God having meaning for you. Therapy allows a person to deal with the mental and emotional blocks that make it sometimes hard to believe that God is actually talking to you. And so doing the work allows you to be able to read God's word and have a relationship with God and confidently say, God, do it for me too. I'm deserving too.
I am so grateful for the men of God who I had the opportunity to interview over the years. I've also had the chance to interview many people who are part of clergy to talk about church hurt and some of the things that they've witnessed that the leaders in faith communities need to be aware of so that we can become places of healing. Check out some of the stories that have really impacted me over the years.
And when I got pregnant, there were conversations that was had behind closed doors to be forgiven and ask for forgiveness and really help me. But then publicly, I was ousted, I was ostracized and said that, until whatever time frame, there was no specific date or time that was given, but for the time being, we're going to have to ask you to leave. And so I had made a promise to myself that I would never step foot in another church, because what happened was I couldn't separate the message from the messenger. And I started to idolize the fact that God, who I now serve, was not the God I served then, but it was the man that I served. And so when man disappointed me, I immediately associated that to God disappointing me as well, which did not allow me to thrive spiritually because I was so hurt. I felt tainted. I was ostracized and traumatized or re-traumatized, because if this is supposed to be my place of healing, there's no reason why my place of healing is now my place of pain.
Or as to how someone who's in leadership or in a role such as yourself at your church can go about interacting with someone in a way that does not bring harm but brings healing.
Yeah, great question, Jocelyn. I think that as leaders, we have to become more self-aware. And I think that when we are not self-aware, what ends up happening is that we don't realize the impact that we have on others. One of the things that we must be aware of is that our hurt places can be the place of which we inflict on others our hurt place. And so we've heard it said this way, hurt people hurt other people. And I recognize that in myself. There's some areas of healing that needs to take place. And so if I'm not self-aware that those things can impact other people, we tend to act out of our places of pain, right? And so when we're not self-aware, we can do things to other people because it's an area that we're not healed in.
One of my favorite episodes was when I interviewed a dear sister named Victoria, and she talked about the process that we need to take to renew our mind.
Then ask yourself, what am I thinking? So you recognize what you're thinking. And then you have to say, I have 3 questions I ask. Is what I'm thinking, is it what God says about me? Is it what God says about himself? And what does God say about my situation? Is this his take on my situation? So if you answer those 3 what questions, what does God say about himself, me, and the situation, then you can tell very quickly if the thought you're having is true or not. And okay, so we do that first. We recognize, and then if it is not true, if it doesn't align with our biblical worldview, our biblical principles, and the truth, then we have to reject it. We have to resist it. And that to me is a part of armoring up each day. We're going to put on the full armor of God. We're going to be ready for those darts that may be coming. And because sometimes it feels like a battle. For me, with all the dandelions in my backyard, it was a battle. And I got frustrated and I got tired and I got discouraged in that battle. And because it was more than I needed, just to take another step and in a different direction to come at it, like I said, and go deeper to the roots. But I got tired of resisting and rejecting almost, because it's like, where's the fruit in this? I'm not bearing the fruit. And I wanted to bear different fruit. And so I was kind of stymied in all that, but I got really good at those 2 steps, at recognizing and rejecting. I did a pretty good job at replacing with God's truth. So that would be the third R. We recognize, then we reject or resist, and then we actually have to replace it with God's truth. And I like to call, like a scripture verse in this case, I call it a truth lead, because it leads me out of this place where I'm stuck, and it takes me into a different direction altogether. And where there is truth, and where there is truth, there is life, and there's energy and vibrancy and joy, and no lack of any good thing. There's no chaos there. There's peace.
Out of all the episodes that I've done over the years, that's one that stands out above the rest. When I interviewed Ken Berry, who was falsely accused and put in prison for several years and had to fight this battle for his life to be released from prison. This I call the viewer's choice episode. Check out this clip.
Like I said, I was arrested November 16th of 1991. I was convicted by March 5th of 1992 and sentenced on April 2nd of 1992.
My God. Okay, so
You get convicted, and they gave you your calculation sheet to talk about how long you were going to actually be in jail. Talk about that moment.
Yeah, well, once I got down to Stateville Correctional Center, they give you a calculation sheet, and this sheet lets you know your projected release date and your mandatory release date. And keep in mind, this was in April of 1992. At that particular time, I was told that my projected release date was May 16th, 2009, and my mandatory release date was November 16th, 2026. So when I looked at that sheet, right then and there, I made a decision that that's not going to be me. I balled that sheet up, I threw it out of the bars, and at that particular moment, I had to make a decision that, number one, I wasn't going to accept it. Number two, I had to definitely rely on my faith. And number three, I had to understand what happened to me so that I could figure out how to get out of it, actually.
Now, that response, I love your response. If I were in your shoes, in addition to that, I hope I would respond as well as you did, because I feel like I would have been a little angry. Like I would have had a lot of emotions. Did you feel any emotions at that time other than I got to do what I need to do to get out of here?
I didn't have a lot of time to be angry. Anger wasn't going to help me to, get out of the situation I was in. I mean, I had never been arrested before in my life, and I'm in a totally abnormal society inside the prison at that time. I mean, and at that particular time, Stateville Correctional Center was known as like the Terror Dome. It was, one of the worst prisons in the state of Illinois. And, I was like like a sheep, so to speak, that's not in your proper environment, so to speak. So there was a lot of things I had to do. I had to learn my environment, learn how to survive in this environment, and also learn how to get out of the environment. So there was no time for me to be angry and not focused or anything like that. I mean, if somebody tells you you're going to be someplace for 35 years, I mean, it's you gotta be focused.
Words cannot express how grateful I am for each and every one of you. This has been an incredible journey, but I feel like I have not gone through it alone because you've been right there, praying for me, encouraging me, and reminding me what this is all about, to glorify God, to remind people that healing is possible and they're not alone on this journey of faith. So if you were blessed by today's episode, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and just mention, what is your favorite episode? Why do you love this show so much? So that we can help to increase our rankings and get this message out to the world. And if you're not a podcast listener, that's okay. Be sure to subscribe and share this message with a friend so that we can continue to have another 100 episodes and well beyond that. So I thank you for tuning in to today's 100th anniversary celebration, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. So until then, you stay blessed and you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you soon.